From Madrid's dusty training fields to the hallowed grounds of Old Trafford, Alejandro Garnacho's rise seemed destined for legend. But in the shadows of that ascent lies a fracture few saw coming. A story not of failure, but of betrayal, ambition, and power. At just 21, Chelsea paid $40 million for a winger once hailed as Manchester's crown jewel. Yet behind the headlines, there's a rupture deeper than a transfer. Benchings, silence, public jabs, and exile from the squad. This video unpacks the hidden truth behind Garnacho's dramatic fall from favour at United. The coach he fell out with, the moments he was cast aside, and how he eventually forced his way out. Along the way, we'll question, did United truly undervalue him? Did Garnacho push too hard? Or was he simply caught in a system built to break young stars? Stay tuned, because few ever question the ending. It's time to dig into what happened behind the scenes. But in football, nothing rises forever. Because when you climb that fast, the spotlight burns even hotter. And for Garnacho, the heat was about to start. For most players, the jump from youth football to the Premier League is a wall few ever scale. But Garnacho didn't climb it. He sprinted straight through. In 2022, his name began echoing through Old Trafford stands. The crowd had seen him in flashes, that raw, fearless energy that makes defenders nervous before the ball even reaches him. When Erik ten Hag gave him his debut, Garnacho treated it not like a gift, but a challenge. Every touch screamed intent, every run a statement. I belong here. Then came the moments that turned promise into belief. That curling winner against Fulham in stoppage time. A goal that silenced the critics and exploded across social media. The FA Cup magic. The solo runs where he left veterans clutching at air. Garnacho wasn't playing like a prospect, he was playing like a headline. Off the pitch, he was every bit the modern footballer. Tattoos, confidence, and social media charisma. Some called it arrogance, others called it self-belief. But what mattered was that United finally had something they'd been missing since Ronaldo's departure. Electricity. That spark that makes fans lean forward in their seats again. And speaking of Ronaldo, the connection wasn't just aesthetic. Cristiano took him under his wing. In training, Garnacho mirrored his diet, his routines, even his mentality. He once said in an interview, "He taught me to be obsessed, and that obsession is what keeps you alive in this game." For a time, it seemed like destiny. The heir to the number 7, carrying the same mix of flair, hunger, and ego that Old Trafford thrives on. But behind the flash and confidence, tension was slowly brewing. Garnacho's rise was meteoric, and meteors burn fast. Rumors of frustration, whispers of dressing room friction, and clashes over playing time began to bubble beneath the surface. For the fans, he was a new hero. For the club, perhaps, a growing headache. Because as quickly as he'd lit up Manchester, the light was about to flicker. It's one thing to make it to the top. It's another to stay there when the spotlight turns cold. By the spring of 2025, Garnacho's story at Manchester United had begun to shift. Not on the pitch, but behind closed doors. His minutes were shrinking, his name appearing on the bench more often than the team sheet. And then came the night that changed everything. The Europa League final. Garnacho had played a role in every knockout round. His goals and assists helping United reach the final. But when it mattered most, he was benched. 20 minutes, that's all he got. When the whistle blew and United's campaign ended, the cameras caught him, head down, distant, furious. After the match, he didn't hold back. "I played every round, and then nothing," he said in a brief, clipped comment that echoed far louder than it should have. Fans defended him. Pundits debated him. And inside the club, patience thinned. From there, things unraveled fast. Reports surfaced that Garnacho was training separately, not with the main squad, but with the bomb group, a phrase no footballer ever once attached to their name. Whispers suggested a rift with the manager, about attitude, discipline, perhaps even control. Others said it was just football politics, a young player too ambitious for a system that no longer fit him. Either way, the damage was done. What once looked like a fairy tale began to feel like exile. Social media added fuel to the fire. Every cryptic emoji, every unfollow, every liked post was treated like evidence in a case the world was desperate to solve. The fans were split. Half saw a fiery young talent wronged by the club, the other half saw immaturity dressed up as defiance. And through it all, Garnacho stayed mostly silent. No public war of words, no interviews, just training videos and muted smiles. But silence speaks loudest when the whole world's watching. And soon, everyone realized, this wasn't a dip in form. It was the end of an era. Every football story has a point of no return. For Alejandro Garnacho, it came wrapped in blue. After months of tension, silence, and speculation, the news dropped like a thunderclap. Chelsea had signed Garnacho from Manchester United for around $40 million. The boy who once represented the future of Old Trafford was now walking out under a different badge, down a different tunnel, in a different shade of blue. For United, it was business. For Garnacho, it was personal. He had been exiled, isolated, told to wait. And when the door finally opened, he didn't hesitate to walk through. The media framed it as a betrayal. United wonder kid jumps ship. Garnacho cashes in. But those who had watched his journey closer knew the truth. He wasn't chasing money. He was chasing minutes. At just 21, he'd lived a career's worth of drama. And now, in London, he saw an opportunity to rewrite it. Chelsea's new manager promised him freedom, not just to play, but to express, to be bold again, to become the version of Garnacho the world had only glimpsed. When he stepped onto the pitch at Stamford Bridge for his debut, the roar wasn't just for a new signing, it was for a player reborn. Gone was the frustrated boy who'd spent months training alone in Manchester's shadows. What stood there was a young man, scarred, sharper, and hungrier than ever. United's decision baffled some. Why sell a generational talent to a direct rival? But modern football rarely deals in sentiment. It deals in spreadsheets, clauses, and image control. And Garnacho was no longer the poster boy they wanted. In his first interviews as a Chelsea player, his tone was measured, not angry, not vengeful, just focused. "It was a bad moment in my life," he said quietly, "but that's football. You keep going." For fans, the transfer was shocking. For Garnacho, it was liberation. Sometimes, leaving isn't about running away from the past. It's about proving it wrong. When a young player leaves Manchester United, the story almost writes itself. The tabloids sharpen their pens, the pundits clear their throats, and soon a narrative takes shape. One that's easy to sell, but rarely accurate. In Garnacho's case, that narrative came fast. Disrespectful, arrogant, ungrateful. 3 words that followed him from Manchester to London like luggage he never packed. The truth, as always, was more complicated. Inside the dressing room, some said his attitude had become difficult. Others said he'd simply stopped pretending to fit into a system that had already moved on from him. Coaches can call it discipline. Players call it survival. Online, every post was dissected like evidence. If he smiled, he was mocking United. If he stayed quiet, he was sulking. If he trained harder, he was desperate. The same passion that once made fans adore him was now being used to question his loyalty. Meanwhile, pundits filled the gaps with speculation. Too much too soon, they said. Another kid who believed the hype. But those same pundits had once called him the next Ronaldo. Public perception in football moves faster than the ball itself. One good week, you're a hero. One bad headline, you're a villain. And in Garnacho's case, the shift was brutal. Chelsea fans welcomed him cautiously, curious but skeptical. United fans were divided, some heartbroken, others relieved. And in Argentina and Spain, where his dual heritage makes him a fascination, the conversation turned philosophical. Was Garnacho too emotional for England, or too ambitious to wait his turn? What most people missed is that this wasn't a story of ego. It was a story of identity, of a kid who grew up idolizing Ronaldo, only to learn that not every club wants another Ronaldo. Because for all the noise, one thing remained true. Garnacho's talent had never been in doubt. Only the story around it had changed. And in the age of clicks and clips, the story is what the world remembers first. But as Chelsea soon discovered, Garnacho was ready to start writing a new one. In football, every chapter feels final until the next one begins. And for Alejandro Garnacho, this is only the beginning of his second act. At Chelsea, the story is no longer about exile or conflict. It's about redemption. Every match, every run down the wing, every goal is a quiet reminder that he's still here, still fighting, still creating, still proving that talent doesn't fade just because one club stopped believing. There's a fire in the way he plays now. Not the reckless kind, but something sharper, controlled, measured. You can see it in the way he looks for the ball, the way he celebrates, the way he stares down defenders like he's got something to prove to all of them at once. Maybe he does. The legacy Garnacho builds from here won't just depend on goals or trophies. It'll depend on how he grows as a player, as a leader, as a person who's already lived through what most pros don't face until the end of their careers. Pressure, criticism, exile, reinvention. If he thrives at Chelsea, this whole saga will be remembered as the making of him. The moment he stopped being a story someone else wrote and started being the author. If he falters, people will call it a cautionary tale. Another wonder kid undone by ego and noise. But either way, the journey has carved something real in him. The kind of depth that can't be coached or taught. He's no longer the wide-eyed teenager who mimicked Ronaldo's celebrations. He's the man who learned what it costs to follow your own path. And maybe that's the lesson hiding in all of this. That greatness isn't about staying where you started. It's about daring to walk away when your story deserves a new chapter. Because when the dust settles and the headlines fade, what remains is a truth that every great player learns. You don't define your legacy by the club that lets you go. You define it by what you do after. Alejandro Garnacho's journey is far from over, but his story already reads like a modern football fable. Youth, talent, and a twist of betrayal. He came to Manchester as a teenager full of hope. He played like a star before expectations grew heavier than matchday shirts. And when the club turned cold and silent, he walked. Not quietly, with demand, pride, and a price tag that said, "I matter." If Chelsea becomes the stage where Garnacho finally blooms, we'll look back and see this moment not as his fall, but his rebirth. But if he stumbles, people will remember him as the rising flame that burned out too fast. The real lesson is this: in football, talent is only the start. The rest is politics. The rest is timing. And often, the rest is surviving in a world that expects perfection before a player even finds his footing. Garnacho isn't just switching clubs. He's switching the narrative. Whether he becomes a legend or a warning, one thing is clear: the greatest stories are never told in goals alone.